Hello and welcome to this lecture on Adobe Photoshop by Eduonics. In this lecture we're going to be going into color and gradients, just the basics. As you probably already know, there's panels that are for both color and there's swatches that you can load up. I usually like to load them both together, so I'm just going to pull this out and attach it to the color panel right here. As far as gradients, that's Shift G until it comes up with this, or you'll see it as the crosshairs. But if you notice, if you press Shift G, it cycles through fill, material drop, and finally gradient. As you noticed, when you drag a gradient, it goes from the color up here on the left to the color on the right. And the default is set to our foreground and background, so you can have a quick gradient just by changing the foreground color and the background color, and you can cycle through those by pressing X. As you can see, by setting my foreground color to green, my background to orange, it automatically changed this gradient up here. If you mouse over, you see it says foreground to background. Just like the one next to it, it's foreground to transparent. So whatever you have in this front box here to transparent. And just like with the others, if I press X, it changes. Since X will switch your foreground and background colors. So gradient is really a tool that's up here. As you can see, when I go to save, it saves a solid color swatch. But let's take a look at color real quick. Depending on the color mode that you selected, in this case I'm in red, green, blue, which is the basic screen color mode, things for web, things for that kind of thing, as opposed to the other main kind of color mode, which is CMYK, which is for print, because cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is K, corresponds to the kind of colors that you can use when you're printing. So you want to have it set up for whatever you're going to be doing. In this case, I thought RGB was the most appropriate. It determines what kind of colors you see over here, and it determines the colors over here. As you can see, you can even switch these in the middle of your project, and it doesn't switch the project. It's still RGB, but I'm using CMYK colors, although I suggest you stay with the ones you're using. Let's take a quick look at all the different color models. RGB is red, green, blue. As you can see, the sliders correspond to red, green, and blue. I'm going to break this apart real quick. There's also hue, saturation, and brightness. And what this is, and I can show you more clearly with an adjustment layer. It's essentially what you get when you go to hue and saturation. You have hue, saturation, and lightness, which is about the same thing. So I can change my hue, and that is the quality of, or basically the frequency of the wavelength of reflected light. In this case, created light. It's basically the color. And it doesn't have anything to do with how bright or dark or dense or dull the color is. As far as density and dullness, is otherwise known as saturation, which is down here. This is the S in HSB. So you can see with zero saturation, it becomes completely colorless, or hueless really, gray. With a medium saturation, and then with a high, heavy saturation, you can see this more clearly if we go to colorize. Lightness or brightness is pretty self-explanatory. All the way to the left it's black, all the way to the right it's white, and in the middle you have kind of a neutral. Now if we go up here, we can select the color specifically and pasting in here with half saturation, for example, full saturation with about half brightness, and full brightness. You can play around with that and figure it out. I like to use HSB a lot. It's very specific, and it lends itself well to creativity in terms of colors, because unlike hex codes and the regular color model, you understand exactly what you're getting with HSB. A hue, and you say I want it to be very dull and very dark. You know exactly how to do that. And in which case I want it to be as bright as it can be, and medium darkness, so you get a very expected result. So I use that one a lot. And then RGB and CMYK are obviously the same, except they have one's RGB and one's CMYK. One's print, one's screen, respectively. Or should I say RGB is screen and CMYK is print. Now I'm in RGB, since that's my main color mode here. And if you see, there's a little exclamation mark here, and it says warning out of gamut for printing. Something you don't really have to worry too much about if you're in RGB. But if you want to correct this to make it in gamut, just to be safe, and color is not that much of an option, and I'll show you here, that's the color as it is. If you just click the center, you'll select the nearest in gamut color, and that would be the nearest in gamut color for printing. So the way it appears on my screen now is what it'll look like printing, whereas this supposedly doesn't print well, although there's all kinds of printing technologies. I don't really click that that often. So then there's lab and web color sliders. Web color corresponds to 256 color sliders. As you can see here, it's generating a hexadecimal, which is a certain base of numbers code. If I were to go FF, which is the highest amount, it's setting all the sliders to the max, and it will in turn give me white. If I were to go 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, it'll be all black. And the reason it's letters and numbers is because our base 10 system doesn't work that well. If you see, if I just hit the up arrow on these, when it reaches 9, after that it goes to 0A as opposed to 10. So 0A is 10, this is 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then it goes to 1 on the left and then 0. So it'll go back up to 19 and then 1A. That's how the hex codes work. And when you put them all together, you get this hex code here, 1A 0000, which corresponds in this hex color model to 1A on red, and then for green 00, and then blue 00. So you combine them all and you get a hex code, which is very useful in web. It's basically the standard for web. although modern day browsers and screens and everything can display a lot more than the regular web colors. It's still used very frequently, and you'll need to know it. Lab sliders is a very exact, scientifically based color model, and we're not really going to get into that much here for time's sake, but feel free to play around with it. So we've taken a look at all the different color models, and of course grayscale. It's pretty self-explanatory. You want to make sure you're in the one that you want though, and let's take a look at some of these spectrums. When you change them, it changes the bottom here, which is also a selector. Some people like to use that. By clicking Make Ramp Web Safe, we change this ramp to the 256 color option. You can see that more clearly with RGB. Zooming in here, you can see that it's very blocked out. And I don't use this very often. I wouldn't worry about making things web safe, because if anything, it's going to approximate a color. If it's not a web color, it's going to come close enough to it. Only when you absolutely have to, of course, conform to a 256 color scale, which is like if you're making a GIF, graphics interchange format file, then you want to keep it to 256 colors, for example, because if you were to use a color and it won't show up, your end result is going to look a little bit different. And we have some copy options here, like copy color as HTML, copy colors hex code. If I copy color as HTML, I'll just show you what it copies to the clipboard. This is the HTML code where if I were making a tag, it would go inside these brackets. Pretty convenient if you're working on web. A div, for example. Although this is it doesn't do it for inline styles. So the most useful is copy colors hex code, in which case that's what you come up with. So now you've seen all those different color options. Now it's time to take a look at the swatches panel. And swatches can copy any kind of color by hitting new over here. It'll give you the opportunity to name it. Then it'll automatically put it as the next, going from the top, left and right, top to bottom. You can hit it as many times as you want. It'll create new colors of the same thing, and it's using the foreground color. And if I hit right there, it'll use the background color. Now, if I go to the options up here, upper right hand corner of the swatches palette, I see a lot of different options, but let's just focus on everything above replace swatches, starting with large thumbnails and the thumbnail size essentially. Small and large list is pretty useless for these colors, unless you only have a limited amount, but you see what this does. If you're saving it as names and that's important, then you would use it. I hardly ever use it, but I do use large thumbnails. This is something a lot of people don't look into because it's in the options up here, and they just go with the default, which is small. And sometimes it's just better to have larger thumbnails, and I use it whenever that there's extra space, when it doesn't take a whole column. It's about the standard width of a column here. Anyway, that's what that does. New swatch is the same as that little button I was pressing. Preset manager is the same as any Adobe Photoshop preset manager basics. So if you go to it, you can select multiple colors, delete them, select colors. I'm holding in shift to click, shift, and then click, and then I let go, and it selects everything, and I can save that set or I can delete it all. Reset swatches takes me back to the original. I'm going to hit cancel though. If I hit append, it'll add the original swatches to these. Load swatches, save swatches, pretty self-explanatory. Save swatches for exchange is we'll create an Adobe Exchange file, which can be used in different files, and it has its own purpose. You know when you have to use it though. And then replace swatches or replace selected swatches. Now down here we have all the different kinds of color libraries. You have your Pantone colors, which are the standard, long established color matching standards. And then you have all these other ones. They're mostly self-explanatory. I use Pantone most of the time, and it'll tell you according to the type of paper you're printing on. You can use these Pantone solids for just like generic versions. HKS is Hostman Steinberg Druck Farman. It's an abbreviation. It's just another color system, just like Pantone. It's one of those things that you know when you have to use it. And it's pretty simple, pretty basic. I'll just click on one of these so you can see. They contain, in general, they contain 120 spot colors and a bunch of other process colors. As you can see, it's giving me the option to replace them, and that's what I did. So these are the HSK colors, HKS colors. And Pantones give you a lot more options. Let's just take a look at solid, uncoated Pantones. I'm going to hit OK to replace. So as you can see, there's a ton of colors here, and it's pretty well organized. But any of these things you can get with these color sliders right here. I hit reset swatches. So going back to gradient really quick. Remember, it's using our foreground and background color, but there's also all these other gradients here, and this is where you select gradients. Up here is where you create gradients, and if I click on any of these and double click, I select the color for the first one. Notice it isn't changing my foreground color, so I'm creating an entirely new gradient here. If I want to do a green to a dark green, and right here you'll notice this is clear even though I have green selected. That's because up here, and you can tell because it's white, is transparency. It's called the opacity stop, and you can shift it. You can also shift this color. And when I shift this towards the darker opacity, you can tell this is black. The dark green color becomes more visible where the slider is. Let's go ahead and adjust this opacity. I can hold in shift to go up by units of 10, or just regular mouse wheel to go up by units of 1. And all the way up, obviously, is this color we have here. And you can set these sliders to anything you want, and set these opacity sliders to anything you want. And also by clicking anywhere, you can add additional sliders. And the reason why this is cool is pretty self-explanatory. Now you'll see I'm going to hit new, and it'll create my new color there. And I can use the preset manager to save all different kinds of gradients. And right here, you notice I have some transparency in the middle. If I drag my gradient across, it'll shine through some of the original. Now, gradients are just like colors. They correspond to what you have selected, just like anything else in Photoshop. If I drag my gradient all the way across, it only goes in the selected parts, much as the same if I'm using the fill tool, or if I'm just using a regular color with any tool. I just inverted it in that case. So there you have color and gradient. Go ahead and play around with the different colors and different gradient combinations. Look at all the different combinations that you already have made for you. There's color guide, which are the colors all organized in recognizable kind of themes. You have like complementaries and very contrasted colors up here, and you have some like pastels and some darker colors. So it makes it easy for you. It's kind of like Cooler in Illustrator. But go ahead and take a look at all these different colors. This is original Windows color scheme, or Windows color choices for Microsoft. Go ahead and take a look at all these different ones. Make some gradients. Use the gradient tool located under the paint bucket if you can't see it. And use the fill tool. We'll go into more of those in other editions, but for now, just really get to know color and look up color theory online. Look at different color theories. There's a site called Color Lovers, and that's with a U, and it's really useful. Check that site out. Look at all the different palettes and stuff people have come up with, and really learn as much as you can about color, because there's a lot of ways, as you see, you can manipulate it in Photoshop. And thanks for watching.